I have a bit of an interesting relationship with entrepreneurship. My parents are entrepreneurs, so I was kind of raised with an entrepreneurial mindset from the get-go. It was never really a mystery to me that I was going to start my own company. It was kind of just a mystery when it was going to happen. So when I made the decision to kind of get into games, my school that I went to really pushed AAA. I was really excited to get a job offer at Bethesda right out of school. But honestly, even from the moment that I started at Bethesda, I knew that I was kind of training myself to go this route and start my own thing, basically. So kind of what led me to the decision to sort of, I guess like cut the cord with a formal job and like make my dream come true essentially was it really had a lot to do with timing, and then it had a lot to do with where I was personally at in my career at the time. The project that I was working on at Steelwall at that moment was at kind of a good stopping spot. It's always a bummer to leave in the middle of a project, but I figured if I was going to leave, it was the time to do it. And it was a really good time in my personal life. I had just moved back to Colorado and really kind of felt the sort of culmination of the first about 5 years of my career kind of coming together. And just decided to make the leap, luckily with the support of my parents and my sister, who's my business partner. And it has been a really, really crazy ride so far. We're coming up on a year now of Walk in the Park.
So with Walk in the Park, what's one thing that no one ever tells you about starting like a game studio, like independently? Like what's one thing that stands out?
Um, well, you hear a lot that you have to be your own boss, which is true, and it's fantastic when it comes to stuff like I get to decide what goes in all the levels. And then it's terrible when it's like, who has to email the accountant? Ah, that's me. That's my job. So I think what a lot of people don't tell you, like a lot of the advice you'll hear on LinkedIn or on social media is like, when you have an idea, the first thing you should do is hire 5 people, hire a producer, hire a programmer, hire an artist. What I would caution developers is when you hire those people, you are now not only your own boss, you are their boss too. And once you start doing those managerial duties, you really lose a significant amount of time in engine. So what I guess nobody tells you is you are going to be spending a lot of your time doing stuff that is not just working on the dream game that you quit your job and decided to found a studio to create.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell from just trying to start this podcast, I need to do 100 things, and I can't just do the podcasting bit always.
I can't
Uh,
even imagine. Like I used to laugh at like, oh, YouTube creators only upload once a year, la la la. Now I completely understand because
but
it really is so much work to produce, and I don't even know how you guys do it like with live content. The grind just has to be insane.
it's a huge thing. You can optimize all these like different facets of it
Yeah.
from the homepage and the channel, but like similar to games, like there's always something that you could be doing
Yeah.
better, that you could be improving. What were kind of the early things besides kind of the engine, and we'll get to that stuff that
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you
yeah.
wanted to work on. What were the things around just getting this game studio set up that kind of you found yourself having to do and balancing with other kind of responsibilities?
One thing that was pretty complicated was my sister and I decided to found Walk in the Park like as an official LLC right when we were also moving from Texas to Colorado. So we had set up and established our LLC in Texas. Texas makes it really easy. It was like a super quick fee change over everything. And then when we moved it to Colorado, there are some slightly different rules. And so we basically had to go through all of the steps with like both states to make sure that our LLC was in compliance and that we could move from one state to the other with different laws. And Texas doesn't have an income tax, but Colorado does. So that was definitely like a little bit of a learning curve. I talked to the Secretary of State of Colorado, which I never thought I would do, to, just make sure that everything was squared away. I think also like the physical for me it's a little bit different because I work with family, but the um the mechanics of figuring out who's going to do what is also like kind of a big thing. Like when you get into games, it's a lot of really passion driven people. And so either everybody wants to do everything or everybody has their one tiny little thing that's like really that they really, really want to do exclusively. When you are like, doing this startup process, kind of getting yourself going, if you want to start with a small team, you have to start taking on jobs that aren't just level design or technical design or 3D art. And working out those, we call them swim lanes at my graduate school, can be really, really difficult. We still haven't quite gotten there with my studio, but we're making it work.
Yeah, because ownership can be so multidimensional and kind of these entrepreneurial kind of
Yes.
initiatives, right? It's like it's in a larger company, you may be for a specific feature or a specific area of the game, and like you have a specific task or not a specific task, but maybe a specific area of tasks, and you have to deliver in that way because that's how kind of the cumulative contribute together. But
Hmm.
a startup or kind of an independent studio, like if you're doing level design, you may be doing kind of like engine coding, or you may be doing some art if you have to, because maybe the
Totally.
artist. So how has that been in terms of balancing that? I understand with your sister. So a super cool thing like ever.
Yeah,
Just
it's awesome to work with her.
and I have so many questions just for that. How it is to build a studio with a sibling, but how have you and your sister and the rest of the team? If it's just not if it's is it only you and your sister, or is it a
There's
wider
four of
team?
us actually. So it's the
Okay.
two of us, and then we have two business partners at another teeny tiny little indie called Squirrel Fight Interactive. Their names are Will and Dana. Will is our engineer, Dana is our artist, and yes, that is the whole team. So actually they're a husband and wife. So we have a husband and wife team and a sibling team working on the game, which is kind of
That,
fun.
that that's so cool.
I know.
So
Yeah.
So with these smaller studios, like how do you get things started? Do you build in product? We talk a lot about like an MVP, having a minimum viable product that you can kind of test with early users to validate if kind of this value proposition that you've injected in this small amount of features is going to resonate with an audience. Has that been an approach that you guys took with building your own independent studio?
Yeah, it definitely has. I think with games, it's interesting. So Sierra and I, my sister, we really grew up playing games together. And as we got older and started developing a genuine interest in building them as a craft, as a science, we started discussing them very analytically. And that's honestly like one of my biggest pieces of advice for anybody who wants to get into the industry is when you are playing a game, don't just think about having fun. Think about why you're having fun. And so for us, when we were kind of looking at the original idea that we had, we knew that the original idea was going to be fun because it's a co-op 3D platformer. And co-op 3D platformers have kind of a long history of being enjoyable. You know, we're really following the Nintendo approach. Like, there's a very rich history in the platformer genre of strategies that have worked in the past. So for us, our really very, very initial process really was looking at it very much like a science and saying, this is this idea that we have, this creative spark for when we come back, the first game that we know we want to make together as a team. What are the 5 things that we've learned from Mario Odyssey, from Wind Waker, from Rhyme, from Pode, from all of these reference games? How can we start kind of pulling those things together into what we're pretty confident is going to be a fun demo? I think one of the things that's really hard about games is the time investment to building something that is fun to play is more than you would think because everybody says, including devs, I'm guilty of this too. You say, oh, I'm fine with seeing in progress work. I'm fine if things look ugly. I'm fine if there's no sound, whatever. But the reality, unfortunately, is that a lot of the fun in games comes from that, what we call juice. And so for us, it was really about identifying before we started building the like 4 or 5 lessons that we'd learned, like I mentioned. And then when we started building, it was how do we take those basic tenets that we learned from Mario, from Zelda, from Spyro, from Ratchet and Clank, from these great franchises that we loved, and add something unique with the juice. So that's really where we put a lot of our focus and where we've been really fortunate to have playtesting groups and stuff respond very positively is in that sort of ephemeral, it's beyond just jumping. It's not just the player jumps when they hit the A button. It's you get the, kick up of the particles, and then you get the little sound when Mario jumps, and then when you land, maybe you land on something, or the thing you land on has a little bit of a different texture. Like those kind of details to me are really what makes indie games so special. And so when we were looking at our MVP, we started with a very reasonably scoped piece of content. We basically built our tutorial level as our demo. And the goal was, okay, here's like 5 puzzle rooms. You do the same thing pretty much with slight complications in each puzzle room. Why are each of these 5 spaces going to be unique? Why are they going to stand out? Why are players going to remember them? And what we landed on for us personally was really a lot to do with the environment. So we're very fortunate to have such a great artist, but it had a lot to do with building spaces that had visual identity and stuff like that. And what we found was when we were able to put players on a tropical island, our game takes place on a tropical island. When we were able to launch the game and have you be able to pick up a controller and run through a bunch of palm trees with your friend out into a beautiful sunny meadow full of hibiscus flowers, that was really where we started seeing the response that we wanted. Even if the gameplay itself and the systems themselves weren't rewriting the book or reinventing the wheel or anything super to write home about yet, that spark, that fun was still there. And so it was very encouraging to see. And throughout our design process, we have really tried to both remind each other, like, I'm whiteboxing right now, for instance. And whiteboxing is a super frustrating process because you build the level and it's not fun. And it's not fun because it doesn't have any of that other stuff that you're talking about. And so it's really important as developers, when you are working on an MVP, to look at the thing you made and go, okay, this white box isn't fun. But it's not fun because it's not fun to jump and run in a game. It's not fun because there's no particles, there's no water, there's no interactivity with your fellow player yet, things like that. Really seeing the forest through the trees, I think, is super important when you're starting a game project.
So for the purpose of people listening in,
Yeah.
what do you mean exactly by whiteboxing? Because that's something that
Sure.
I love these terminologies. I think are so important.
Absolutely. Yes. I'll talk a little bit about that. So whiteboxing is a term that I learned in grad school at SMU Guildhall. You may, or your audience may, have also heard the term blockout. If you're not familiar, actually, there is a really awesome thing that happens on social media every October called Blocktober, where a bunch of designers will post their in-progress whitebox levels. And these are designers who are working at Naughty Dog or who are designers like me, who are just passionate about level design. So anyone listening, Blocktober, check it out. It's super, super cool. You can find all the old stuff on the online still and everything. A white box or a blockout is essentially what it sounds like. Like, imagine if the very, very simplest form of a level. So the level that I'm blocking out right now is our water temple, and it takes place inside this giant sort of cave structure. So what our artist built me was a doorway, a wall, and a floor/ceiling piece. And what it basically is it's my job now to take those three little pieces that she made me and build essentially a skeleton, like the scaffolding of the house. Or, just imagine a house empty, just the drywall up. That's essentially what a white box is. It's a physical in-engine way for, like, my sister and I to go and test if the gameplay's fun, but also for me to say to our artist, this room, I would love to have a skylight. Is that going to be possible? Like, or how do you think that should look? In my opinion, one of the most important things that a white box can do is inform your team about what you're thinking as a designer. This is super important for level design because I personally, and I know a lot of level designers do this, tend to get really excited and make up a whole bunch of super cool, like, overscoped stuff at Whitebox. And at Whitebox, it's much easier to cut it than it is if you get all the way through decorating it and lighting it and then realize that something isn't working, either because the gameplay isn't working or the art isn't working. Usually Whitebox even precedes gameplay. So you'll block out, again, like just the house with the drywall in it. After Whitebox is a phase that we call initial gameplay, or again, that I learned at school was called initial gameplay. And that's where you actually fill in there's a moving platform that moves across this gap. At Whitebox, it's maybe just a bridge of cylinders that I put there in the engine so that my sister and I could run through really quick. At initial gameplay, my sister, our technical designer, has written the code to make that platform move. And now I can put the moving platform there and we can go, oh, that's a fun moving platform, or maybe this gap should be shorter, or the room should be taller. Yeah, essentially a skeleton. That's what a white box is.
That's an incredible explanation. Thank you. I understood
that. Very in depth. I know.
It's perfect, honestly. And I'm going to run this back, of course, in the clips, but kind of what I also wanted, then this is how I see it. When you're coming in and you're building a game, you have to, there's like the character movement and like how they just traverse the world, right? And how there's that, is it first person, is it third person, and just how does that character move around? And then the second is the white boxing, which is just making a template, an outline, almost like a mold of the world before you add all the details, before you add all the dynamism.
A mold is a really good way to put it. I think that's, like if you mold something before you paint it or anything like that, like that's really what a white box is. It's a lot like Legos, actually. When I was working at Steel Wool, we did some physical prototyping with Legos, which was a ton of fun. And actually a very good tool. If you are somebody who's interested in level design and you have experience with Legos or physical building blocks or anything, those can be an amazing tool for getting your ideas out there without having to put all the time investment in getting it Unreal.
Absolutely. So with something like whiteboxing and everything we've talked about so far, I want to get into level design. And with level design, I've been judging competitions for students that are submitting independent video game projects straight out of university or college, one thing I've noticed is onboarding is so tricky to get right.
Yeah.
So hard, because how do you, like, imagine, I always think of a prime example, Nintendo 64, Super Mario, just getting dropped in, eh, and you just kind of, you're outside in this like nature area. We all remember it when we were kids
Oh
playing,
yeah.
and
Hmm.
you kind of just stumble around, you jump, and it's fun, and then you get into this house, and then you kind of, the gameplay is so genius almost because of its simplicity. You just kind of
Yeah.
fall into it naturally as one would in real life almost. How do you approach your kind of onboarding and just your narrative level design when a player is starting something fresh?
Something totally fresh. Well, we're having to do this double because our game that we're building at Walk in the Park right now is for beginners. So we have to take tutorialization or onboarding like to the max. I think one of the sweet spots that you can hit, and I think the example that you gave is one of my favorite examples, and actually the beginning of Portal, the first Portal, is another one of my favorite examples of tutorialization, because you, the player, don't even realize that you're learning. That's one of the things that I personally think makes the strongest and most compelling tutorialization is you are handed a controller. And as somebody who has played games or who has decided to pick up this game controller, you know the thing that you are physically holding is going to do something. So you have essentially been presented with an experiment space. You know that anything you do with this controller is going to do something in the game. And really, really good tutorialization, in my opinion, gives players the freedom to explore and experiment with that controller in very, very controlled circumstances that lead to mastery really quickly. This is why I think Portal is so fantastic, because the tool is tutorialized in 3 really small rooms, but by the time you're done with those 3 rooms, you feel like you are a master of this tool. You understand how it works. You know what spaces in the world to look for. There's a lot of visual cueing that goes into that, which I think is like super important. It's sort of a line between like player curiosity, which has a lot of psychological stuff behind it, a lot of scientific research behind it, and then you, the dev, wanting to make sure that players don't have a frustrating experience. What I see a lot is, especially in indie games, I play a lot of indie games. I mostly play indie games these days. And I think that a trend that I've seen is developers being so paranoid that players won't have exactly the experience that they intended, that before I even get the chance to try the stick, I'm inundated with information. I think that a lot of devs are afraid of players doing the wrong thing. But in my opinion, actually doing the wrong thing in a game can be some of the most fun that you can have in a game. The way that we're addressing this, and when we come back, our current title is we actually have sort of like a playable start screen. Basically, you're on this teeny tiny little sand island, and off in the distance, you can see the island where most of the game takes place. And when you get the controller, the first thing you have to do as a player is run over to the little boat that your characters are going to get in and take to the other island. We don't tell the player how to move the stick. The first thing we tell them is how to jump when they come up to like a place where they have to jump across a gap. But we don't force them to learn how to move, learn how to look around with the camera, things like that. Because we believe that those kind of things are both very basic for gamers who haven't or who have gamed before, and also just as human beings, when you're holding something, you want to figure out how to use it as a tool. So we want to encourage our players to have that moment of discovery themselves and curiosity themselves. And I personally think that that is where some of the strongest tutorialization comes from, because it is really hard, as you said. Like, especially in levels where you have multiple mechanics that get introduced. Zelda temples always come to mind for me with this, because they're sort of the classic, like, you do half the temple and then you get the hook shot, and then you do the other half and you feel really cool because now you have the hook shot. And if you look at that, one trick that they use that I personally love to do in my designs too is they show you things that you can interact with before, that are very obviously interactable, before you have the tool you need to interact with them. I was just replaying Wind Waker, and a good example of this is in one of their temples, you get a grappling hook. Before you get the grappling hook, you can walk to a particular area and look up and see little like branches where I, the player, am going, that doesn't belong in the environment. That's something I'm going to be able to interact with. So I'm already primed to be curious about it. And then when I get the hook or the grappling hook later, I'm immediately presented with a chance to use it. And in the back of my head, I'm already thinking, I saw those things before. I want to go back there and, try to do whatever thing I couldn't do before. So seeding your levels with basically like little questions for the player. How do I interact with this? What am I going to end up doing with this? Giving your player kind of that playground, in my opinion, is like one of the best and coolest things you can do as an onboarding strategy.
So it's almost like when you start a game, you're confronted with problems. You're obviously confronted with an environment that you're trying to traverse, often linearly, or if it's done so brilliantly, it is a linear kind of direction, but you feel like it's expansive. And that can go in different ways. But I think the really good games, I think we're both kind of on the same page about Nintendo just doing this brilliantly. It's just, again, showing you a problem and then be like, okay, I see that. I've acknowledged it. I'm not actively thinking about it because there's nothing I can do. All I can do is jump.
Yeah.
But then when I get that tool, it clicks. I hit the mic. It clicks to understand.
Yes.
I can solve that. And that's almost like a natural way of.
It's extremely natural. It's actually how your brain learns to like play when you're a baby. You learn through mimicry and you learn through that kind of experimentation with like, I see a block. I see my dad pick up the block. Now I know I can pick up the block. It is very ingrained in our brains. And I think that I personally don't think that psychology gets enough credit as a genuine root of a lot of level design stuff. I am constantly looking at the architecture around me, at the spaces around me and stuff as how does it feel to be in here? How does the physical space feel? How does the amount of space I have feel? Things like that, because it is different in games. The amount of my office is like a small-ish room. If I built exactly this size of room in a game, it would feel really, really cramped. So you have to look around in the real world to kind of get, and then learn the differences and the sort of tools of like, how can I tell how much affordance or difference there has to be between the real world and this thing that I'm making digitally?
So one of the things I notice of onboarding, I think with games in general, because I've talked about this with prior guests in prior episodes, was this idea that there's this kind of the app store model of approaching games where you're analyzing metrics. And I think this kind of serves to explain why a lot of game developers in indie or even just in larger games are looking at their onboarding like a metric exercise. Like, how do we get this number to go up? How can we get them past almost like making YouTube videos, like getting them past the 5-second watch mark, getting them past the 10. How do we make sure they come back? And I think my hypothesis is that you lose a little bit of a soul trying to go through that and trying to kind of make sure everything is measurable, make sure everything is being impacted. What are your thoughts on that? Because it's so refreshing to hear a take of let's just create an experience that feels natural and human rather than let's optimize every single step to make sure that it's super clear to everyone. And what's the loss there for you? If there is one.
I could not agree with you more. I think that it is soul crushing and damaging to the industry that every game should try to be for everybody, because you're never going to make a game for everybody. I mean, no matter what you do, there's always going to be some percentage of players who put your game down because it's not fun. As much as you and I are lauding Nintendo right now, there are people who hate Nintendo games. And I get it. There are different people's brains that work in different ways who are attracted to different kinds of things that they think are fun. Like, I did not like Super Meat Boy, but I loved Hollow Knight. And the gameplay is somewhat similar in some ways between those two games. And the reasons that I did or didn't like them have nothing to do with metrics, in my opinion. I think that this is why actually I have found myself gravitating towards indie games so much. And you can read any number of people who know a lot more than I do about the AAA industry and sort of issues that it's having right now. But this to me is something that is a huge detriment to AAA, is this mentality of we are going to use purely data to analyze what players like. If they're doing this, if they're doing that, if they're doing that, it does not mean that they're having fun. Like it's not even commodification. It's like datification of fun. And I just don't think you can measure that. I think that games that are made by small teams, and I mean, everybody, of course, will look at Expedition 33 right now, and I think that's very valid, because one thing that game really had was flavor. And so many of these games that are trying to do this across the board, everybody can do everything, metrics-based exclusively, in my opinion, it really dilutes the flavor of the game. And games are such a time investment and such a personal investment when you get invested in a world, in a story, in a character, that it's really important that everyone, that like the game that you're investing in is worth your time. And I just don't think that there's such a thing as a game that is worth everybody's time or that everybody is going to get through. So I personally think that it is somewhat detrimental to the industry that we have become so focused on, can every player do everything? And I understand the mentality. Again, in my opinion, it is tied to this sort of growth at all costs mindset that a lot of really, really large companies seem to have because they have really large budgets and really large, needs and stuff. This is why I, as I mentioned, have been playing so many indie games. I personally feel like these teams that are small but have a vision, that know what they want to make and don't care if not everybody gets it, are how you get your Expedition 33s and your Balatros, these titles that are made by small teams with people who are really driven and really know what they want. And again, like I said, just it doesn't bug them if you don't like their game or I don't like their game. They love the thing that they're making, and people who like that kind of thing understand that and will respond to it, in my opinion.
That's exactly the feel I got from Expedition 33, is that these guys just decided to get together, build a game that they thought was fun. Obviously, there were calculations about the genre and kind of who
Yeah,
they're
of
trying to
course.
appeal to. As in any business, you have to make kind of those assumptions, but it just really felt like something unique and different. And again, it was made by ex AAA developers, and they just got
Exactly.
together.
Yeah.
What do you think made Expedition 33 stand out so much? I think it's close to game. I don't know. Was it Game of the Year this year?
I don't know if they've had the awards yet. I
It's
actually
not.
don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I
Maybe
know it's up there.
nominated, if not.
So,
Um,
so what has made it so special? Yeah.
Again, I feel like it is a commitment to telling the story that they wanted to tell in the way that they wanted to tell it. And in my opinion, it stands as kind of in opposition to a title that I worked on, Starfield, which is the idea was you got dropped into this universe. You could be anybody you wanted. This universe is gigantic. Now it's up to you to make your own story. We have a story for you, but you don't have to play it. You don't have to engage with it. Expedition 33, while they do have a lot of, content that you can do on the side, that's open world, things like that, they knew what they were trying to say and they gave you a through line to follow it. That I haven't played a game in a really long time that gave me the same feeling that playing The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess gave me. That's one of my favorite games because playing through it feels like reading through a really good fantasy novel. You're like, I'm the hero. This is my jam. It's my story. I'm doing all this cool epic stuff. I'm fighting all these amazing monsters, and none of it would be happening without me. And that's the feeling that Expedition 33 gave me that was really exciting, in my opinion, is this nothing could happen without me. And that is a type of player fantasy that I think a lot of open world games have drifted too far from currently, in my opinion. Really, really massive games that, assume that every player wants to just be dropped in and given a blank page. But having been to a lot of game design meetings, I can tell you, not everybody thrives with a blank page. Some people want to have lines on the paper or an outline to start with. And there's nothing wrong with that. We play games to experience stories and worlds that are unlike our own. And I personally am most compelled by worlds that are driven by something. And the whole of Expedition 33 had this beautiful momentum through it that kept me. I'm a side content person, and I was propelled through the story on that game. So major props to that team. I thought the writing was beautiful. The voice acting was incredible. The art was great too. Like they really knew where to focus their attention. Like they weren't trying to be unique in every single way. They were trying to be unique in their way. And as we all have now seen, that is massively successful for them.
Yeah, it's an incredible job they've done.
It is.
With something like we've talked so much about Nintendo games, and I feel like a lot of it for us, especially kind of us going through our journeys right now in our careers, etc., we look back at Nintendo games when we were of a certain age when we played them.
Yes.
And I always think back to, of course, the world moves on and there are new generations coming through and younger players kind of that have, like when I was growing up, I had my Game Boy. I had I had all my different Nintendo games. I had Pokemon. Slowly started expanding towards like PlayStation and kind of other Ratchet and Clank, etc. How do you think expectations have changed with newer generations? Would someone who was born in 2003, 2004, maybe a teenager right now, can they still fall in love with Nintendo games? Is it because we're a product of that time that we fell in love with like this narrative style, and that
Mhm.
players nowadays kind of being exposed to the Fortnites and kind of these new battle royale games that are just like stimulating and addicting and
Uh-huh.
very, very powerful in their own way. Do you think Nintendo games still resonate, or is that like a nostalgia thing? I try to remove myself
I
from
know.
kind of just seeing everything as like, of course, this is the way it is for everyone. It must be like
Yeah.
it can't
Mhm.
be, right? So what do you
First of
think?
all, wild that teenagers are now born in like 2010, 2003. Like that's
Nuts.
crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
That's too young. Um, I think that there is, I really do believe this. I think that there is always going to be a place for the classic Mario games. Um, I live in Colorado, so we did a lot of mountain travel when I was a kid. And one of my favorite things about traveling in the mountains is there's very little cell service. What was great for us was we had a GameCube, so we didn't need the cell service. So we could bring Wind Waker with us, and go play. And it was always really fun to connect with people like offline like that. And I really feel like that experience does still exist. I still see it when I do wilderness camps with kids, when I, go up with my friends and their families, and I bring my GameCube for their kids to play Mario Party and Mario Kart and stuff. They do still love it. They do still resonate. I definitely agree with you, though, that there is a difference. I think that player expectations have shifted a lot. Games are noisier now than they used to be. Obviously, they look a lot better than they used to. We've gotten used to, like I was mentioning earlier, all that juice. We've gotten really used to that. And so when a game doesn't have it, it stands out a lot more now than when it didn't used to have it. Like, back in the day when when I was first playing Super Mario Sunshine, I love Super Mario Sunshine. I was actually playing that game again last week. And I think that like when I sat down to play that game, it was so visually stunning to me because I'd never been anywhere like it, and I had never had a, flood thing that sprayed water around or whatever. And I do still believe that that magic is there for kids. I think that games have held our hands a lot more as they've gotten more realistic with not forcing us to imagine stuff so much. I mean, as a fellow nostalgia gamer, I'm sure you have looked at things that you thought were incredible in games when you were a kid, and then you're like, ooh, that's really ugly now. Like the PlayStation 2 graphics, the nostalgia goggles, like whatever you want to call it. But I do still think that like there are rules to do with the gameplay that will always be compelling and that will always be fun. I think that it probably would be harder to get a kid into something like Mario World 3 now. Than it was when we were kids. But I don't think that that's the kids' fault. I think that it is a lot to do with the industry, a lot to do with short form content and how quickly they can change attention spans. A lot more kids want to socially game now, which is part of the reason why we are making co-op games. Our goal is to basically try to create a retro platformer that is for two people and does have a little bit more of like modern sensibilities to it, to hopefully bridge the gap a little bit, because I would love it if everybody loved Nintendo games as much as I do. I
So
also
first,
think it's funny because it's harder to play them now too. Like I have a GameCube, but kids don't have a GameCube, and they haven't put all the GameCube games on the PC or on the Switch.
yeah, that's such an odd decision. I just
Yeah.
want to say
Oh my God.
Nintendo does do weird things. I
They
think
do.
they're trying to figure out something to do with that. But Super Mario Sunshine, what a game! You
Yeah.
were thinking of like games that like looked incredible when I first played them.
Hmm.
I adored that game. It was so mysterious. I can't even remember if I beat it because I was a kid, and I remember I got to like
Yes.
towards like the later ends. I can't remember.
You just run
I
around the city spraying stuff. It's
ran
so
around.
fun.
No, there was this one level I can remember. If I were to go back and play, I could pinpoint it. But it's an incredible game. Um, what I really wanted to understand then is what do you mean by narrative design? Kind of what are your rules towards narrative
Mhm.
design? Like if
Sure.
you had to give a game designer tips on what it means to build a world, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be about onboarding, but what makes a
Yeah.
world come alive and feel real and like worth investing in, despite maybe not having all the information and just trying to get immersed.
Totally. For narrative design specifically, I think one rule that I have always had is any anything to do with your world, you should have an answer that goes two questions deep, not just one question deep. If someone asks you, why is this character in the middle of the road in your game? Oh, they got lost. They got lost because they don't have a map of the area. You know what I mean? Like it can be something that simple. Or why will this character not tell me who they are? They won't tell me who they are because their backstory is a secret. Their backstory is a secret because they're actually Aragorn, the real king. Like there's always these examples of one, two questions deep. And those questions, in my opinion, should be answered everywhere in but dialogue. Those like dialogue is great for some things, but I think one of the classic mistakes that I see from people, I talk to a lot of students who want to get into this industry and into narrative design specifically, and they want to get into it because they only want to write. And I think that if you are someone who wants to write for games, don't look for a narrative designer role, because narrative design does encompass so much more than the writing. It encompasses the environment, it encompasses the systems of the game, the way that the game is scripted, the way that the game is paced, the way that the game is lit. Like everything is narrative design, in my opinion. And so it does kind of bug me when the industry acts as if like narrative design is only done in the dialogue. I think that an immersive world does come down to those details. Like it really comes down to, I as the player have questions about the world. How are they going to be answered for me? And I think personally that it's okay to leave some things mysterious. Undertale, one of my favorite games, is a really great example of this. I think Undertale did one of the best jobs I've ever seen of being a very small game that took place in a very giant world, a very small sliver of that world. Like I got the sense the whole time I was playing that game that I was in one little place that was part of a whole expansive universe. And the way that they accomplished that was through those very careful little details. It was through the little comments that the characters made to you. It was through the tone that resonated through every single character's dialogue in the whole game. There's nothing, in my opinion, that ruins immersion with characters, like two characters that are completely different tones for no reason. They're hanging out next to each other. One's having a great day, one's having a bad day for no discernible reason. It really breaks immersion. But Undertale had that consistent tone. It had the consistent sort of vibe through the whole thing. Even like the size of the character on your screen compared to the height of the background contributes to that feeling of smallness. And a really great narrative designer is somebody who can look at a game holistically and understand how to create the intended experience for the player. And if your experience stops at, I want you to go talk to this person and feel sad about what they told you, then you should write a book. That is my opinion.
I love that. So if I'm a narrative designer and I'm looking into Undertale,
Mhm,
rather than just saying I want them to, like you said, go to the quest giver and
mhm.
just embark on this journey, it's much more like a broad outlook. Is I want the feel
Yeah,
of the to feel like I'm small. It's not just the world that feels overwhelmingly massive, but also the way you feel in this world and how the player interprets the scaling of this world compared to the character itself.
yeah.
That all has to spread through in like a consistent, coherent manner, and that's the trick in a narrative designer. Like not everyone can do it, and it does
Mhm.
take passion and skill and understanding and experience to get
And
to
a
that point.
team sometimes, like a lot of people with
Team.
different experiences. I think especially in AAA, it's really important to have, we were very lucky to have a crew at Starfield or on Starfield at Bethesda who had all worked together for a long time and all had a very consistent vision for the game. And it was great to know that you could ask them questions and they would, they understood the whole universe, which was a lot bigger than a lot of individuals on the team could understand. But having that vision was so important and always is. And yeah, that's my take.
Talk to me more about vision, because that is
Mm.
something that I see in the games I've worked on and the projects I've had. You always need one person to kind of carry the torch of that vision, but then has to
Yeah.
light kind of smaller flames among the team and keep those flames alight, right? It's
Yes.
like you have this one kind of torch. What, with your experience, and you've worked in such incredible studios like Bethesda, you just mentioned, in the
Hmm.
Starfield team, like what was it about that vision that kind of kept everyone aligned, and what did you take away from that experience?
Well, it was really a thing working on that game. Like it was by far the biggest game that I probably ever will work on. Um, and it was really amazing to see the kind of collective vision start to come together. Specifically, the way that like the development of that worked was those like kind of smaller flames you were talking about, where like the different cities would have a team that all were working together on this particular city in Starfield, or the companions would have a team that was working on like this particular feature of the game. And every month we all kind of tried to like come together to make sure that everybody was on the same page. So it is a daunting effort to make sure that everyone kind of understands like that vision. But if you have leaders that you can trust, that is really, in my opinion, where a lot of it comes from. You yourself don't necessarily, as a dev on a team of 800 people, I don't need to know exactly what the vision for this one really tiny planet that my work doesn't touch is. But I should know who to ask, and they should know the answer. So again, like in these giant AAA situations, you can't always expect every single person to know everything about the world, but they should be experts in the part of the world that they touch, and they should know exactly who to ask to get answers about parts that they don't touch. Now, that is obviously extremely different than indie, where you often, like on our team, I would say that the creative vision holder is me and my sister collectively. But for levels, it's me, and for the systems, it's Cece. So, there is some like messiness, but before we tell our business partners anything, Cece and I always talk about it to make sure that we're on the same page. And I think that a really good leader and a really good creative director is somebody who can sometimes say, this isn't how I imagined it, but you are the person who is the owner of this, whose swim lane this is in. And so I trust you enough as my business partner that you understand that this will be fun for players in a certain way. A good example in our game is we have a flight system, like a physics-based sort of glider flight system. I am not a math person, and I have not played a ton of games with flight in them. Cece, my younger sister, is very good at math, very good at science, loves birds, has always played flight games, like whatever. So when we were first building our flight system, we both knew we wanted to have a flight system. The first thing that Cece turned into me, I was like, this is unplayably hard. Like, I don't know what we're going to do. Like, I think you might need to rethink this. It's a little too much. And Cece was like, no, practice with it for 20 minutes and then come back and tell me if it's too hard. And I did. I went away and I listened to Cece's advice, and I came back and I was like, you were right. It took a while to get onboarded. So as narrative designers, we now know the system works. It's the level design that needs to be altered to better tutorialize this mechanic and give our players time and space to be, to become masters of it. And I think that a lot of people make the mistake of kind of assuming that itself isn't like narrative design, but in my opinion, it totally is, because how the player feels, how you, the player, feel while you're playing the game is sadly the most important thing in a narrative. You can have the most beautiful dialogue ever, but if your player had a bad day, or if they can't see because an NPC is blocking them from seeing the character they're talking to, they're not going to have this experience you want them to have anyway.
I love how you talk about autonomy and giving ownership. I think that's something that in larger companies, and I would imagine in AAA as well, there just doesn't seem a lot of ownership going around because the stakes are so high, and because there's a lot of money being invested in these projects. I don't want to say micromanagement, because I think that's an extent of it. I'm sure it does exist, but I don't want to be pessimistic straight off the bat.
Sure, yeah.
But I would say that a lot of it is just kind of just hovering over people and making sure that, hey, are you following this line? Because this is what I communicated to my manager, who's 2 steps above me, and you're 2 steps below me. And it's this constant kind of like, people, if these games are meant to be experiences created by people that really believe in like the game itself and are trying to craft these, they're on the ground building the very thing. And if you don't give them ownership, or at least the voice to express what they feel could be good, and you have to toe a very strict line, that's where you kind of lose the fun, and you lose kind of just the passion that's behind these games.
And I will tell you, it is hard to do this job when you don't enjoy some part of it. Like, you don't have to love the game you're working on. I very much believe that. I have worked on games that weren't the kind of games that I play. Almost everybody I know has worked on a game that they were like, this particular project I don't love. However, the camera system I built is incredible. This level I designed, I love. We made this whole new lighting architecture just for this, and that's my work, and that's so cool. And that's one thing about game design as a career that I think is really difficult, is you need to find a way to find your work fulfilling when all you did today was like put cubes in an empty room. You know what I mean? But you, the designer, have to have in your own head the vision of what it will be. And it is your responsibility, in my opinion, as a designer, to be able to clearly communicate that. If your boss 2 levels above your boss asks you, why did you add this hallway? The design doesn't call for hallways. You can say, oh, but won't it be so cool? The player will have this tense moment where they go from this room to this room, and the hallway provides a nice cool down, so they'll be like primed to have that new experience in the next room. And in my opinion, that is where a lot of like jargon comes in. If you know what you're talking about and you have done your research and you have reasoning behind your designs, you become much harder to argue with, and people are much more likely to trust you. So, at least for me, in those situations where I have had a bit of, micromanagey tendencies, which I think happens with everybody. I mean, I catch myself doing it, and I work a team of 4 people. The best way to get out of that situation, whether it is conceding to my boss's idea or going with my own idea, the best way is to just get something on screen and let somebody see it and just say, I know this is not what you had in your head, but just look at this. And this, again, white boxing, it all kind of comes back to stuff like that of just, I put something physically on screen for you. Before you say no, will you just look at this and tell me why this won't work for you?
It's avoiding assumption-based thinking.
Absolutely, which is so hard when you are making a game and you're like, I think I know what's going to be fun. I think I know what the player's going to want to do. It can be really hard when someone's like, I think you might have been wrong about that.
You are not the user is like literally in product. That's
Yes.
all. When I before I got into games, I studied a lot of product and just was a product manager in other companies. But it always goes back to you are not the user, and we forget that sometimes. And I think part of the difficulty is that in games, like, you are sometimes the user. You do sometimes feel very strongly who the player is, and maybe you represented them, or maybe you talk for the you've spoken to so many of them, and you just have this really strong idea. But then there's that other person in the room that says, well, what about this type of player? And
Absolutely.
all players are the same. So how do you size like your player groups? How do you know who is going to be appealed to your game that you're building right now with Walk in the Park?
I think that is a lot about, I mean, some of that does come down to datification and a little bit of market research of looking at what we're making a game for younger audiences. So we're looking at what types of environments are popular with younger audiences right now. What types of gameplay are they liking? They love social games. We wanted to make multiplayer games anyway. How fun. So that, it does come down to that. But kind of like what I was talking about with flavor earlier, I think building your player group also comes down to building the group of people who you are okay if they don't play your game. Like, people who love first-person shooters and play, Call of Duty competitively online will probably get nothing out of a Walk in the Park game. But, you might, and even if it's not your favorite game ever, because you grew up playing Nintendo games, you'd probably recognize something in When We Come Back and find it compelling for at least 30 minutes. And I think that when we're trying to like sort people into those groups, we have to remember that different levels of engagement too. Like, the guy who plays Call of Duty competitively online might never pick up When We Come Back unless he is a kid. And then his 5-year-old wants to get into games and he would love to game with his 5-year-old. And now maybe they pick up When We Come Back because it's a game for kids and they can play it together. So like you said, kind of remembering that like different people play games for different reasons. And then it comes down to, which groups do we care the most about like marketing to? Which groups do we care the most about finding our game and then spreading the word? Because so much of indie games now is done via word of mouth, via social media, via Discord. How do we like get the group that's going to be the most passionate enough that they'll be the 10% of people who would like recommend Microsoft Edge to their friends or whatever they ask you in those survey questions when you get off the browser?
So how do you find these players? Like, if for the people listening that are maybe want to start their own game studio, like, okay, I can build a game, and I can maybe I've gone to school and I know how to make it good, or I have a great team. How do you get it off the ground? What's the typical structure for starting a game and just making it into a successful venture or something that can be built on?
Sure. Yeah. I get this question a lot from a lot of students who are at different phases of like considering this, from other industry devs who are thinking about leaving their jobs. And I think that when you are starting your own thing, especially if you're a student who is very, very new, the most important thing that you can do today to ensure that your game will be a success someday is download Unreal Engine and start watching tutorials. Every game developer needs to know how to use an engine. It is a skill that is like so fundamental. The best producers who I've worked with in the industry who don't usually work in the engine have at least had an understanding enough that when I say the variables are broken, they don't look at me like I have just said something in a completely foreign language. So learning the engine, learning the pieces of games, I think is also really important. There are phenomenal channels online. The Game Maker's Toolkit is one of my favorites that I watch regularly and that I always recommend, especially to slightly younger students, because I think they do a great job of breaking everything down really well. Um, that's, again, just most important thing you can do. Engine skills, you need to have them. You need to understand the component pieces of what makes up a game. And then I think I actually have this written down on a sticky note to write something about in a couple weeks because I'm really passionate about this. Why do you want to do this? The first and most important question you can ask yourself is, why do I want to get into games? Do I just want to get into games because I have a great idea for a game, because I like to play games, because it's the fastest growing career field in the world, which you still hear, although I don't know about that anymore. The reality is that making games is very hard and it's very specific and it's very time consuming. And from experience, no one in your life will understand at all what you're talking about when you talk about work. And so, as someone with an idea, with a drive, you need to decide if it is worth it for you to keep working on that idea every single day for 5 hours while you're learning a software that you don't know. I hate to be a dream crusher on this, but I think that it's so important for people to understand the reality of this, which is that the vast majority of your time when you are making games is not fun. It is work. It is hard work. It is time investment. It is learning psychology. It is learning color theory. It is learning about code. It is learning how to fight with your sister and then get along at dinner. Like, there's so much that goes into building a game, especially building one by yourself, that I think the best thing you can do, download Unreal, follow some tutorials, build something really simple. Epic themselves has some great tutorials. And then after you have put in that weekend or that week or those hours after school or whenever you have time after work, then decide if you could do this every day consistently for like 5 years, because that is probably about how long it's going to take to get that idea from being just an idea to being something that you could launch, market. Again, a lot of stuff goes into it that isn't just being in the engine, for sure.
That's what I love about games. It's so multi-dynamic. If you already consider entrepreneurship or even making an app or starting a business requires so many different things like people management,
Yeah.
branding, sales, you name it. You can just go down the list of arms of the business that where you require to have some kind of knowledge to oversee it.
Hmm.
And I think with games, this is even more exponential because of the creative aspect of making a game. But
Yeah.
for me, that I'm a dummy, explain to me what an engine is for a game. Why is there Unreal and why is there the other one, which is
Unity.
Unity
Yeah.
and Unreal?
Oh,
I'm
you just
actually
made the people at Unity so sad.
no, because I have the reason it wasn't coming up. I have an episode coming up with a Unity product growth manager next month. So I'm very much looking into getting into Engine because
Oh,
as me as a
cool.
product manager and someone who's never been super technical into games, but I'm learning and trying
Sure.
to understand, I can understand why there's confusion around like Unity. And like I think a lot of people who are into games kind of see like these big programs and think, oh
Hmm.
dear, like this is going to be way too complicated. I might need to know how to know maps or I need to know how
Yeah.
to program. So what is an engine for you? What's an easy way to explain it?
I see an engine as a toolkit. And there is a difference between Unreal and Unity. I think that Unity is an IKEA toolkit that you have to put all the tools together before you can use them. Unreal sells you is a toolkit from Home Depot where you go and you buy the hammer and the screwdriver and the wrenches, and now you can go home and do your DIY project. So when you are considering like what engine to get into, I actually do think that looking at your personal like learning style and level of expertise is really important. I actually learned Unity first and then switched to Unreal. My sister's the opposite. She learned Unreal first and then has done some work in Unity. Um, an engine is basically like I said, like it's the scaffolding, it's the building blocks around it. They have different amounts of tools, different amounts of support for you as a new developer. I will say when you download Unity and like open it up or download Unreal and open it up, what's going to pop up is a window with a, sort of 3D environment in it, and then two sort of scary looking like content browser type windows. There are not phenomenal tutorials on both unity3d.com and unreal.com. I think that's what they are. That will basically tell you, like, walk you through that initial layout, walk you through what to do, walk you through like what the different buttons do and stuff. And from there, it's kind of up to you what you want to put in the engine. For developers who are really, really new, I will tell you, there are like a wild amount of assets available for free on the internet. If you don't have the Epic Games Launcher, it will come with your Unreal. And I recommend every week checking what the free assets are on the Fab Marketplace and just downloading them. We have, I don't even know how many gigabytes of just free assets that are just stuff that if we ever decided to prototype like a city level, we could just prototype it. It comes with all the meshes that we need to get started. It comes with buildings, it comes with people, it comes with streetlights. So there are tools out there that are for you that are, if you are a solo dev like me, who didn't, when I first started getting into games, I couldn't do any art and I had taught myself how to code. So I downloaded a lot of stuff to really get me started. And there is nothing wrong with that at all. Some of the best games that come out have stuff from the asset store in them. Like there is no stigma. I mean, aside from some stigma, which I think is very unjust, against using things that already exist. There's no stigma against tutorials. If you are in college, there is some professor on your campus who is really interested in Unity or Unreal and would be happy, probably, to give you 1 or 2 hours of their time to just show you around, show you what to look at, show you how to get into scripting. I will say, if you are thinking about getting into scripting, like building any kind of systems and stuff, there are pros and cons to both Unity and Unreal. Unity is 100% text-based scripting. So when you see like the hackers in movies like coding and there's the screen running, that's what Unity looks like. It's little scripts, linear code. Unreal, if you just have the engine, has Blueprint, which is a different thing entirely. Blueprint is what's called a visual scripting language. So if you've ever seen a picture of a blueprint made in Unreal, or you can just Google Unreal blueprints, they almost look like Lego pieces. Like there's a little block that says if, like an if statement is something you can do in code. And in Unity, you would write if and then write all your code. And in Unreal, you take this little block that says if on it, and then you connect it to other little blocks that say like, if true, do this. If false, do this. So certain people have an easier time learning one or the other. I had a really, really hard time with visual scripting. I will be very open about that. It was difficult for me to learn. I didn't understand the relationship between how things related to each other. And it took quite a while for me to feel comfortable, like, oh, I know what I'm looking at in Blueprint. Oh, I know what I'm looking at in Unity. And I think that for new devs, you really need to get comfortable with that feeling. You need to get comfortable with the feeling of, I'm looking at something, it's a little out of my wheelhouse. What do I do to understand this? Like, is there somebody I can send a message to? Is this something my sister built? Can I ask her? If not, is this an Unreal feature? Can I Google it? Can I go on the forums? Can I talk to someone I know on LinkedIn who works at Epic? Like, that you need to start understanding how to solve problems when you encounter them, because almost immediately upon opening a game engine, you will see something that confuses you.
And is it programming, or is it because for again, for someone looking on the outside, I imagine you're talking about like the visual scripting and like the and
Yeah.
or statements, and I understand that logical structure. I'm sure people in the audience also understand like that's how a lot of kind of, I think, structural code kind of works in that way through the. But what about, is there any more specific code? Is it just kind of following like instructions and just learning about building projects and figuring it out, or is there something more that you could be doing just to really hit the ground running?
I think that personally, I think that experimentation is one of the best ways to get familiar with an engine. If you are starting with an engine, I will tell you, one of the easiest things you can do, like lowest impact things to start with, is to build something with the shapes that are already in the engine. When you install Unity or Unreal, it will have in it like a sphere, a cube, a pyramid, and a plane. 4 really, really basic shapes. You can use those 4 shapes to build pretty much anything. They built Doom with cubes back in the day. Like, you can build any amount of gameplay with just these simple shapes. If you are just gonna take an hour, try to understand Unreal a little bit, sit down, decide if this is something you even want to try pursuing, take those cubes and build a representation of the room that you're sitting in. That was the very first thing I ever did in a game engine. It's sort of the hello world of level design, I will say. before you open any scripts, before you open any materials, before you try your hand at lighting, just navigate around the 3D environment and build something small. Once you have a room, it's much easier to prototype stuff too, because it's like, oh, I want to make a window that opens. Great, there's a window over there on the wall I made. But you know, it can be very intimidating. I remember like when I first took my first coding class because I didn't want to take calculus. So I did not get into this because I wanted to like be a coder or I thought I was going to be good at coding. What really helped me with programming specifically as someone who's not super mathy, sciencey, was approaching it like a logic puzzle. Actually, funnily enough, I love puzzles. I love, you know, Sudoku, chess, like all kinds of games that are very, very puzzle oriented. And so when I started approaching code as puzzle pieces, you know, I have these blocks that I know, the words that I know, if, or, when, what the variables do, stuff like that. Now, if I start seeing it as how do I take these Legos and put them together into the Eiffel Tower as opposed to into the London Bridge, that's really where you start developing that familiarity with like, I've solved this problem before in a different way. How can I take what I learned and solve this problem that's 80% similar but 20% different? It really is about just kind of building up your knowledge base and building up your calluses to stuff going wrong in the engine, because stuff always goes wrong in the engine.
And there's an immense amount of fun and like just like coming back to a problem, be like, oh wow, I've known how to do this.
Yes.
I already know what to do. Let me just like fix this, and then you kind of build that expertise and you build that confidence in yourself, and it becomes very much a momentum thing, right?
Oh, absolutely. The worst, and my sister, the technical designer, will tell you this. The worst is when you spend all day on a problem and you can't do anything. You're aggravated. You yelled at your dog, and then it turns out there's a checkbox for that in the engine that you just didn't see. That happens all the time, and it is a very. I appreciate you saying it's funny, because it is. Like, you have to find humor in those moments, because it's. I mean, it's a miracle that computers work at all. It is 10 miracles stacked on top of each other that we can play any modern game on a computer.
So we've talked to kind of, I can imagine this in like a small scenario where a student or maybe a small team is building on a Unity or Unreal project. What about, let's take it back to working at like a big company like Bethesda.
Yeah.
How do massive 800 team kind of dev projects work through one engine? How does like from someone looking from the outside in, how does that even get coordinated? Like, how do people even know like how this game gets built by all these hundreds of hands coming in and building stuff and then just delivering a branch and then redoing it and then delivering another? Like, how could you describe that for someone who doesn't know?
If you've ever seen an anthill, it's a lot like an anthill. It's just a lot of little tiny moving pieces that all look like they're doing nothing and all come together. I will say, one of the most important things that keeps a game together like that is great production. Production is a discipline in games that I don't think it's talked about enough. It is not the cop-out discipline. A lot of people are like, if you can't code, be a producer. If you can't design, be a producer. That is not fair to producers. The best producers I've had they hold 50 conversations in their head while they're having a conversation with me, and it's incredible. It is really a true circus production to keep everything running smoothly like that. In AAA, a lot of that scaffolding is held up with a pretty rigid structure of like, at Bethesda, we had people who owned certain features. Like, my feature that I was in charge of was the hireable crew. So if anyone in the audience has played Starfield and you walk up to a character in a bar and they have a name and you can hire them, that was my feature on the game. And that was all I did for like a year and a half, was I wrote dialogue for those characters and I got them working in the engine. And I had meetings 3 times a week, once with the quest design team, once with the level design team, and once with my producer, to make sure that I was telling everybody everything. The motto of production on a game, especially a game with a big studio, is over communicate. If people on Slack are irritated because you are telling them something that they've already heard, you're doing your job correctly. It's something that I think a lot of devs struggle with, because so many devs are introverts that like, you don't always have in your head like, oh, I'm going to tell the other person this. Oh, I'm going to communicate this to level design. Oh, art might need to know that I decided that the robot is 10 feet tall now. Not everybody has the ability to have like that level of conscientiousness in their head. And that is where production and meetings really come in handy. A producer's one of their most important functions, in my opinion, is to get people asking each other questions in meetings. Like that example I just gave of now the robot's 10 feet tall, so it won't fit through any of the doors in the game. Like that is something that is very plausible. It has never happened to me, but I can absolutely believe that that has happened to somebody. And a producer, it is their job to say in that meeting, like, okay, Art, this week you're working on the robot. Can we see the concepts that you have? Level design, this week you're building the doors. How is the room looking? Okay, you two, put your things together. Something is not working here. And it's really important that someone is doing that, because you can't rely on individual devs to do it, and you can't always rely on leads to do it either, because leads in the industry have a very like kind of a weird like half managerial, half design job. And so they're always focused on their team and not always looking like out at the very broad stretch of the whole thing. I will say, if you're someone who works at a AAA company, something that I did, I will toot my own horn a little bit. I was very knowledgeable about the games that I was working on at Bethesda. It was really important to me that even though I was not on the systems design team or the spaceships team or whatever, that I understood how that stuff worked. And all I did at lunch all the time was just read documentation. If you are at a good studio, or even if you are at your own studio and you have written stuff, or your teammates have written stuff or put stuff in the engine or whatever, just looking at other people's work always is the best way to stay informed, and in my opinion, one of the best ways to make sure that projects do stay on track. When I worked at Bethesda, I worked on Nuclear Winter, the Fallout 76 Battle Royale. And one thing that we did was, while we were doing quality of life updates to that, we had weekly studio playtests, including feedback sessions. And the way that they would work is everybody would play except for one designer who it was their job that week to go sit in the meeting room and watch the stream of our best QA tester play the game. And while we were watching them play, we wrote down things we noticed. We wrote down feedback we were getting from the team. We wrote down bugs we saw, things like that. And then after that, we would take those into a big meeting with our producer. And our producer would go, these 5 bugs are things that you should fix. These 5 bugs should go to Bethesda Austin because they're base game bugs with Fallout 76. They're nothing to do with Nuclear Winter. Like it is this whole crazy nest, and you really rely on trustworthy and liable people to keep it all together. And in my experience, the best at that is production.
I mean, that's so cool, like the projects you worked on, but I can empathize with you entirely. Like without my producer at work, I would fall apart. And I've told this to him. I'm like, look, I'm doing these podcasts. Whenever I talk about production, I'm talking about you. I'm telling you, like, I would not do I wouldn't be able to function without you being able to say, that is content, that is engine.
Yep.
Like, you do this, you do that, like, got it.
And for us too, like, again, we were working with 4 studios on Starfield and Fallout 76, plus a bunch of contractors, like working on the art, like there are people all over the place. Even when I was at Steel Wool, which is a relatively small studio, we had partners in other parts of the world. We had a partner who we had to talk to in like the evening because he was in some part of Europe, and it's, you really need someone to always have their eye on that.
So is that what makes a good dev then? Like, you mentioned 2 things that I picked up on. One is the ability to communicate, and it's not over communicate, but it's having the empathy, or I like the word conscientiousness.
Yeah.
See beyond just what your output is, but also how it can trickle down into the rest of the game. If you're designing a quest or you're designing some dialogue for a bar scene, but you don't let the animator know that there's outrage in that dialogue, then they're going to have to catch up to your work because you didn't flag it prior. So is that, what are the things that, besides communication, make a really good dev? Like, for someone that wants to work in AAA and looks at your career and thinks, Aspen, wow, you've worked on Starfield and you've worked on Fallout 76. Like, how can I make myself a great hire when I'm in an interview to explain kind of like traits that they may be looking for?
Sure. I think communication, willingness to work with other people, willingness to hear no. You will hear no a lot in this job. And so I think especially for junior devs, it's really important to be able to hear no. And even if you respond negatively at first, kind of get over it. I will say I still have this. One of my flaws, just kind of as a dev, just as a person, I get emotional really fast. And so it's pretty common for me when I hear no to start crying. And so I always have to warn people, like, I'm going to cry, but it's okay. And I think that level of self-awareness is very important too. I mean, games is a passion-driven field. It's an entertainment field. Everyone but the hardcore back-end programmers you're working with is technically an artist to some level. So we all have feelings. And remember, the ability to absorb information, understand that it is a critique of your work, not of you, and then just move on is a skill that I cannot overstate. Neatness and detail orientation, I think, is something that's really important. If I could show you my notebook, you would see just like lists upon lists of checklists. I make myself, when I was working on the companions for Starfield, my checklist would be 5 pages long. Just dialogue for this, exact dialogue for this, fix this bug, do that, do this. And the ability to know your own work and not have to be reminded by your producer every day, like, you said you were going to fix those bugs last week. Where are they? If you have the self-starterness, the good memory, the detail orientation to make those checklists, to deliver things without people asking you, that, in my experience, I think is kind of part of what set me apart as a junior dev at Bethesda, was the ability to get a pretty large feature request from my lead, and he didn't have to like break it down into every component part for me. He could trust me to go back to my desk and come to him the next day with a document that broke it all down myself into levels, systems, quests, whatever to have that ability in your own head to say, I was asked to build this weird camp feature for Fallout 76. How am I going to do that? And to just sit down at your desk and go, okay, someone just literally put like a pile of sand in my lap. How am I going to sort it into this, to make a sandcastle, basically? That skill is very essential. And I also think the ability to learn things by yourself is maybe the most important skill that you can have, I will say, especially as someone who is new. If someone says a word to you that you don't know, or you are looking at a coding problem that's slightly different from what you've seen before, yeah, you have to be able to Google it yourself and figure it out yourself. Or again, the other option, and I was fortunate enough to have this early in my career, is to find a really good mentor. There are so many devs who I've met in my career who would absolutely love to mentor a junior dev. So if you are at a company, if you're just starting, it's like we always heard, find the helpers, you got to find the people who are interested in building up the next generation. There were so many of them at Bethesda that I am so grateful to still for getting me started or teaching me this one random thing, and you never know what kind of impact like those people have on your life until later, unfortunately.
So what's one thing that you learned from Bethesda that really kind of you took with you in your career, like that you had maybe a mentor tell you, or you learned in a particular project? What's one thing you learned?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I've learned a lot. I learned a ton.
I can tell, which is why I almost want you to try to pick one, because
pick one. Yeah, let's see. One thing. I think probably one of the most important things that I learned from my mentor there, I will name him. His name is Dan. He was my lead. He was fantastic. When I first got into the industry, he was really passionate about kind of like building me up. And he really was the one that kind of enforced to me that idea that I mentioned before of blame the product, not the person. I think that is something that every dev I've ever worked with needs to learn how to do, is when you are encountering a big problem in the game, when someone wants to cut a feature that you're working on, or when someone has negative feedback, or even when someone has really positive feedback about something that you worked on, you need to remember that it is your job as a dev to put the game first, always. Because you're not making the game for yourself, you're making the game for your player. And so the ability to listen to feedback, internalize feedback, and understand that the person who is giving you a hard time or who is maybe being negative about your work is still on your team is so hard and so important. Like, the meanest person who you work with is still working on the same game as you and still wants it to come out and be successful. And finding that common ground with people has gotten me out of more tense situations than I can count.
That's so cool to hear, and just that you were able to have someone that you could do that with, that a mentor could give you that experience.
Yes.
Is important.
It was trial by fire too, because it was a live game I was working on, so it was a lot of very quick like feedback and turnaround and stuff.
So do you have any kind of then go in the opposite direction. This is
Mhm.
something that you learned, which is valuable to your career. Do you have any like cool or like fun stories from like, and it could even be from walk in the park, but just
Oh, sure.
stuff that has happened that like people would find interesting. Like, I don't want anything to be like too revealing, of course, because of course you are
Sure.
subject to kind of you've worked in projects where you can only say so much, and this is for everyone knowing in the audience. We can't always go around and say everything that happens. But is there
Yes, that's true for your audience. You can't, don't ask devs what they do because a lot of times we can't
exactly?
tell you.
Yeah, exactly. There's some NDAs going out there, but still, is there anything that you can kind of tell us about what it was like working at these games?
Yeah. Um, Man, I have a lot of great stories. A lot of my best stories are from development, unfortunately, so we can't tell those. But I think that this was actually probably the first, like, what I would consider kind of like big fuck up of my career. And it actually turned out to be a really good thing. So this is a story about how your worst mistake can turn out good. So one of the first things that I worked on, as I mentioned, was the Battle Royale mode for Fallout 76. And when I had first gotten there, I was put in charge of helping the monetization team in Bethesda Austin come up with an idea for daily rewards for Nuclear Winter. So we did some holiday rewards. Any Fallout 76 players might remember we did like a Morgantown, we did Halloween with the glowy skeleton suit, and we did Christmas. We did like a few, whatever. So the first one that came out, I was responsible for scripting everything and putting it together in the engine. And the way that it worked was you had a little drop down where you put like the number of XP that a certain item was supposed to cost, and then you put, the item that it was supposed to be or whatever. So we'd all agreed on the items. The items were correct. They all went out. I gave a testing plan to QA. QA sent a bug back to me that it wasn't working right. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. It's working right. I know it's working right. It's working how I intended. And so I kind of ignored the QA bug. And then the idea with this system was you came on the first day, you played for a certain amount of time, and then you got your reward. And then your XP zeroed out. And so you came back the next day, and then you had to like start at 0 and work your way up to 1,000. So you're trying to get people to play for longer each day. As I've mentioned many times, I'm not good at math. And so I had done my formula incorrectly, and it turned out that instead of 0 to 500 gets you this award, and then 0 to 1,000 gets you this award, and then 0 to 2,000 gets you this award, and then 0 to 4,000. It was 0 to 500 gets you this award, and then 1,000 gets you this award, and then 1,500. So basically, it ended up being that instead of it taking like a week and like 9 hours of gameplay to get all the awards, it only took like 2 hours to get everything. And so of course I was like devastated. I was like panicking. I was freaking out. Because this was 100% my fault. Like I knew this was my fault. Even looking back, like there's no one could have stopped me from doing this. They tried and I ignored them. QA tried and I ignored them. And so I was like panicking and freaking out and like getting we had a call with the monetization team like ready later that day. And I was like, had written up a little note about like, I'm so sorry, this is my fault. And like, I was going to read it to the meeting and everything. And we get to the meeting and the monetization person goes like, we just had the best day in Nuclear Winter ever. I was like, okay. So basically this huge fuck up turned into like a really fun thing for our players, which was they were expecting it to work in this kind of like, it took more time to get everything. Like maybe we don't want to come back. It's the Fallout Battle Royale. Who really wants to play that for 7 days in a row? And it turned into this kind of really fun event for our players where everybody piled into the game because it was quite easy to get these like super fun, unique rewards that we had come up with. And again, that was the problem, not the person lesson, that I was the problem, who no one blamed me, luckily enough. But it did teach me a lot about accountability and also about how sometimes the things that you think are devastating, like even before we found out that it had been a fantastic day in Nuclear Winter, I was walking around like someone was going to cut my head off. I was like, devastated. I didn't have coffee that day. I was sitting at my desk. I was so sad. I was torn up.
Oh.
Meanwhile, my lead is like, whatever. Like, it's fine. Fix it next time. We'll fix it in the next patch. So yeah, don't be devastated if you make a mistake. It happens to everybody.
I mean, to me, that just screams experimentation, right? Like you did
Yeah,
something that you didn't mean to do. That what if there was? I know maybe that in that game mode you can't A/B test it or you can't.
Right. Yeah.
But it just goes to show that even the assumption was if we do it this way, it's going to have kind of slow kind of build up of progression. Which people will invest more time. The event will last longer. There'll be more consistent kind of revenue growth. And instead, because you took off all the rails by accident or just by serendipitously, you kind of came up with like it just created
exactly.
this.
And we ended up actually using it as a model for the future seasonal events for Nuclear Winter, which I was pretty proud of actually the way those turned out. The team who worked on them was really, really fun. It was the first professional like team I worked with, and those people hold a very special place in my heart.
That's so cool. Aspen, I want to ask you one last thing. What is some advice? I know you've
Mhm.
given so much advice, and thank you
Yeah,
for
of course.
again your energy and your passion, and it's such a pleasure to be able to talk to you and just get these stories and these insights. But what would you tell anyone looking? I don't mean people that look and say, "Oh, I want to be a level designer," or
Yeah.
"I want to be a narrative designer," but anyone who's maybe coming out of university that sees AAA game development, sees kind of the cuts in the studios,
Hmm.
the shutdowns, the difficulties in hires. And despite all this, it is a growing industry. It is one of the more forward-facing industries on Earth in terms
Hmm.
of like
Oh yeah.
humans doing things. What is some advice for people who want to get into games?
I would say, as I've mentioned a couple times, start small. Download the engine and start small. Start looking at the games that you love, regardless of how old they are, regardless of how big they are, and just do a little bit of research. It's pretty easy to find out, even on Wikipedia, how long a certain game was in development, how many years it took to make it, how many people it took to make it, what engine they used. Starting to look at, again, the games that you play, not only as those little data points for you, but also as opportunities to do research. Do you like the way that you run in this game? Maybe you got to take that and put it with your other cool idea for this whip system that you saw in this other game. I think that like just granularly looking at games like that is such a good way to get started. Especially if you have somebody that you can do it with. I'm really lucky that I live with my sister and have her to do it with, but a lot of people do it with friends, with partners, with coworkers. Like there are so many people who love to game and who are shockingly nerdy about games. Like if you start talking about traversal mechanics, you'll be shocked how many people have an opinion about them. And listen to those opinions. Listen to the players that you respect. Don't just listen to this big streamer because maybe they're making a game that isn't anything like the game, or maybe they're working, or maybe they're playing a game that's nothing like the game that you're making. We found this especially important with really, really big franchises. Is like you can't listen to all the hate, because if you just listen to that, you'll never get anywhere. I think there are a lot of very realistic tools for scoping your project as well. Tools like Miro and Monday.com. Like there's a lot of free services that can help you organize. The more organized you are when you start building your product, the better. We did about 2 years of just ideating and on paper pre-production before we started anything for when we come back. And a lot of that was, again, idea building, world building, what I would consider like narrative design. Those kind of things are essential to do first. You got to have those two questions deep answers to all of your world before you start building your castle or, whatever it is that your super fun like running system, whatever it is. You have to know why you're making it and like what your end goal is. I would say also narrow down your target players. Figure out who you want to attract. Are you making this game for your best friend? Are you making this game for yourself? And if you are making it for yourself, like this is the situation that I'm in right now, what what things about the way that I play are universal? I like to explore. That's a universal thing in games. Not everybody's going to like everything about my play style, but exploration is something that is, we know players like to do that. Find those common things in your idea, whatever that idea is, and just start telling people about them. Just start saying, I have a cool idea for a game where you explore and it's totally dark. And if people go, oh my God, that sounds amazing, it feels really cool. And I think it also gives you that sense of like, oh, there are other players who play things like this. This is a very lonely profession, I will say. It's easy to feel isolated. It's easy to feel like you're the only person working on this, especially when you are in the thick of production on a project that's going to take 3 years and you're working on a team of three. Like, I don't have anybody to talk to my game about, or talk about my game to. And finding that community is really important, especially if you're getting started. There are tons of really great Discord channels. My sister just joined one from Alpha Beta Gamer, who's a streamer who has like a lot of startup stuff for devs. Like I mentioned, the Game Maker's Toolkit. Unreal and Unity both have really, really extensive tutorials on everything. just start watching those, even if it's not while you're in the engine, while you're doing your dishes. Watch someone play a game instead of watching a video essay, or watch a tutorial on making a particle system instead of even watching someone play a game. Like, just trying to immerse yourself in the science and understand the history of it is essential. I see a lot of people try to get started like, I have a great idea, I'm just going to start building it. That can work, of course, but more often than not, you will end up confusing yourself. Just make a plan first, sit down, download Unreal, build something random, and while you're doing that, write all your ideas out on paper, and then try to put the two things together.
That's a wonderful answer, and you are truly a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you.
And what I took away is really you gotta walk before you can run, right? Like a lot of people just want to start running. You gotta walk. You gotta be organized.
Yeah, we've seen this actually. I saw a very thoughtful post on LinkedIn the other day about how a lot of people left AAA studios and started, their own thing. Like, I got fired at Ubisoft, so I started my own thing. I left Naughty Dog, so I started my own thing. And they want to immediately be making Naughty Dog games or be making, these big games. The game is just cut half of your idea off from the beginning. I had a teacher in grad school, probably the best piece of advice I ever got for games. Do half as much as you think you should, twice as well as you think you can. It's such a great philosophy for games.
I love that. Half as much as you think you could, twice as well as you think you can.
As you think you can, yes. So that's really leaning into the small game, but really juicy. It's the inch deep ocean effect instead of the mile wide lake,
And I love how the more kind of devs I speak to and designers, like the big piece of advice are always the same. Like even Nathan Silvers, who was one of the founding kind of designers and devs for Call of Duty, said the exact same thing in my interview with him, which was start small, try to communicate with devs, don't try to take on too much at the same time, be organized. And I think that's incredible because it shows that there is a way of like really honing in on these disciplines. And it's not just everyone's strength is this and you have to find your way. Like there are rules to this. There are ways of being great that just go beyond just like the regular things. So it's great to hear that like this is echoing.
It is that makes me feel good too. It validates my theories a little bit as someone who's pretty new to this still. It is a extremely rewarding thing, I will say. I know I've said a lot of very sort of serious advice, but I will say that there is, in my opinion, nothing that I have done ever in my life creatively, and I do a lot of creative things on the side too, that is more fulfilling than seeing a streamer laugh at a line of dialogue that I wrote. I almost started crying just thinking about it again now. Watching when Starfield came out and there was a joke I had written for the robot and I had written it 2 years before and I'd sat in the VO session and I'd made friends with the actor and I'd made friends with the director and then I went back and fixed all the bugs and scripted it and everything. And then live in front of me, this streamer laughed at a joke that I made. And it was so cool. And it's really important for devs to find those moments of joy. Even if it's not out yet, even if it isn't, the streamer laughed. When the actor read that joke in the booth, he also laughed. And so you have to look at it not just as when it's out, people will love it, but while you're still making it, people will love it too. When I send a screenshot to my team of 4 and even get a response that's that looks pretty cool for a white box, I'm yes, you have to celebrate your successes because it is. As I said, it's a miracle computers work and it's 10 miracles that games work. And if you do anything in your life to even make a square that I can run on and shoot something out of the default little gun that comes with Unreal, you've done more game development than most people who love games ever will attempt. So good for you.
It's incredible. It's because it's that little part of you, right? I did that. That's something that I contribute. And even if it's the smallest thing, like a player smiling or a player cheering or someone laughing at a line of dialogue, the beautiful thing about all this and what we do is that that's you. That's something that you built, that you kind of put together. And it required a team, of course, and there's no I in team, but fundamentally I love that example because it is such a small thing, but it brings you so much joy because that's your process.
And then again, even that, to your point, even that moment, the actor got to enjoy it too. The director got to enjoy it. The producer who got the VO thing together. The guy who scripted the robot got to enjoy it. The guy who modeled the robot got to enjoy it. The guy who came up with the robot got to enjoy it. All of us collectively put so much of ourselves into just that one little moment. And it is it is so special, and it is why I feel like games are so important, and especially in my opinion indie games, these little tiny projects that just have that amazing spark to them are so important and so essential to the future.
Aspen, look, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. First, I want to tell the audience that's listening, we're planning a second episode with Aspen's sister, Sierra. I'm really excited for that one, and I think we're going to dive deeper into the duality between you two starting a studio, but also kind of getting her kind of thoughts and getting you guys to all three of us kind of mesh together and just discuss more of game development. And also,
Yes.
I'm looking really forward to trying a walk in the park soon.
Thank you. Yes.
As soon as that's ready, I'd love to see it. I'd love to try it. Anyone else here who sees it, put it on your wish list when it comes out.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, if you're curious, we are Walk in the Park Studios. Our game is called When We Come Back. We're at whenwecomebackgame.com. We're still in the process of getting all of our socials and everything up. We're really early in development, but I'll be sure to let you know when we have a wish list up so that you can let your audience know.
Right.
And I'll tease the second part of this too. Anyone who is interested in any like more technical role, like programmery, anything, definitely come back for the part with Sierra, because that is Cece's job on our team and has infinite wisdom to share about Unreal specifically and how to get started with that.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Aspen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.